on this stage now, we're going to have our last session on the narrative debate. And we are going to have Niki Okuk, who's the founder of RCO Tires in Compton, LA, and Guy Watson, the founder and chair of Riverford Organic, who are going to come and talk to us about putting the employees in charge. I'd also like to welcome to the stage Indra, who we've heard from already, from The Alternative and Control Shift, who I've asked to come and co-chair this session with me. So hopefully this will be an interesting debate.
My life, 58 years in 10 minutes. Here we go. That's me. And I entitled it Trying to be Useful, which is, I think, the value that I think I inherited from my parents. There they are on their wedding day, and my dad, well, they both reached maturity during the war years, and came from very privileged backgrounds, but which all that had fallen apart during the war. There was no empire to go and work in anymore, so they had to do something else with their lives. Food rationing and so on, they decided to be farmers, and my mother was also the most amazing cook. So Riverford is all about growing food well and enjoying it. That is Devon, undulating, quite difficult to farm on, and from very early starting to grow the vegetables, I realized that it was all about people, really, you know, making it work, as particularly in that climate, which didn't lend itself to, in that topography, which didn't lend itself to mechanization. Managing staff was going to be absolutely critical. And anyway, I'll come back to that. So that's how it started. That was on the one flat field of the farm, 3 acres, David Bowie haircut, 1970, no, probably actually must have been the 80s, this actually, 1986, not quite that old. And it really, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I started growing vegetables. My first innovation was welding handlebars on the wheelbarrow so I could wheel more out of the, and I delivered out of the back of my car to local shops, then local wholesalers, then wholesalers in London, and then supermarkets as the business grew. In 1993, I packed my first vegetable box and started delivering them. That was really a result of not enjoying selling to supermarkets, and that's more like today. I'm just flying through this. I do have a bit of an obsession with growing artichokes and cardoons. I have a very bitter palate, and anyway, and as you can see, you know, it's incredibly difficult countryside to farm on. I'm on my first kind of straight into the co-op movement, I suppose, was founding a cooperative of farmers in 97, 20 years ago odd, to supply the growing market that we had developed. There we are, they're all looking utterly bloody miserable, as most farmers do most of the time. Looking at about this time of year, we'd just planted out the purple spraying broccoli, which all had cabbage root fly, I seem to remember. It's Anthony, one of the co-op members. They all specialise in particular crops. So happy to answer farmers, co-ops. But, I mean, from my point of view, actually, it's all about relationships. The structure doesn't really matter to my mind. It's about the relationships that you have. Now, the structure may, to some extent, determine the relationships, but this is Pepe, just south of Granada in Spain, and he grows spinach in the winter and asparagus for us. And I think we buy virtually all of his production, or us and a Danish company, and have done for about 15 years now. It's a very close and I would say very good relationship. I should say the relationship with the co-ops is that we have an agreement that lives in the drawer. No one ever takes it out, but it would take 7 years for either of us party to get out of that relationship, which is unheard of in the fresh produce sector. We also, all over the world, this is a fair trade organic cooperative of pineapple producers in Togo who we buy directly from. The business is very complex. In addition to growing vegetables, running a box scheme, becoming an e-retailer, I got it into my head that I was going to run restaurants as well. We built a restaurant on the farm. We got a pub in London. It all has become incredibly complex. So again, I start asking myself, how am I going to manage all that complexity? We even took the restaurant on the road and cooked food in fields around the countryside. I knew that was going to happen. Put this down.
Let me help, Guy.
Sorry, can I just hold it? Yeah, thanks, Ollie. We give cookery classes because the main problem with a veg box is that most people don't know how to cook. It's very demanding, all these vegetables arrive and somehow you've got to make a meal out of it. And I appreciate that that was an issue, so we try to teach our customers. It's going to go again. I'm just going to hold it. I must have odd-shaped ears. This is the Duke of Cambridge in Islington, founded by my wife, who is the only organic pub in the country and still is when I married her. Married her, I bought the pub, and still organic today. I'm just flying through. Challenges that we face today really is our sector, which is really the e-commerce, home delivery of food, is just developing at a huge rate, and people are throwing ridiculous amounts of money. I mean, at one end, there's Amazon, who are scaring the hell out of everyone, but there's also Ocado, HelloFresh, Gusto, Farm Drop, all these incredibly, well-financed companies, through venture capitalists, and we don't have access to that money because, we are employee-owned. So raising capital, not that I would particularly want to compete in that space, but when I go on the tube in London and I see all their ads up, there's no hope that we can ever come close to. So I try to emphasize this to my board members, and my marketing team and everyone. This assumption that most people in business have that we're all rational is just completely ridiculous. We all think much less than we think. 90% of our decisions are emotional, and if you kind of accept that, it makes life a lot easier, and I think it actually helps you make better decisions. This is another one that I have stuck up around the office quite a lot. Re-examine all of you. Have been told and dismiss what insults your soul, which I think so much of business practice is an insult to our souls, and I think should be questioned. That's Walt Whitman, bit of a hero of mine. And this is 6 weeks ago when we did become employee-owned. And sitting at the front there in his wheelchair is my 92-year-old father. Did make him very happy. So that was great, and So why did we become employee-owned? I hate this idea that, that I'm standing on top and, everyone else is working like hell to support me. I've never really felt like that. I felt it was my job to support them and help them to be more effective in their jobs. In fact, I'd go as far to say, as good managers, get out of the way and empower their staff. And this cultural change towards this sort of way of doing business is something that we've been working on for 15 years, I would say, intensively for the last year, and it gathered momentum as we actually became employee-owned. There's a lot of stuff written into our documents protecting the values. How did we become employee-owned? The business is probably worth 20 million. I've sold it for 6 million, and the reason I'm able to sell it for 6 million is because I'd really rather be in a rowing boat than a big power boat. I love the sea, that's my passion. And when I go home tomorrow night, I'll be going off in my rowing boat and possibly sleeping on a beach like that in South Devon. I mean, it's all about, if your appetite is just for more and more of everything, then your business has to deliver more and more of everything. It's just ridiculous. And, anyone who thinks that 20 million is going to make them any happier than 5 million is a moron, I would say. But trying that emotional thing and trying to get the staff engaged with the business, it is an emotional thing, and we look after the things that we love, and I encourage the staff and the managers not to be ashamed of using words like that, which aren't typically used in business. I have a coach who has been working with me and all the other directors and senior managers, and been working on the transition of leadership from this impish little brat who could do whatever he wanted when I owned the place. And so the transition always involved something dying and something being reborn. And she asked me what I wanted to be reborn as, and I decided it, should be Gandalf. I even tried growing a beard. It didn't go very well. But I'm trying to, anyway, the rest of my life I hope will be less impish and more about using my wisdom to support other people to do what they want to do. Niki, your turn, I think.
My name is Niki Okuk. I am the founder of RCO Tires in Compton, California. This is the rest of the team who unfortunately cannot be here. We are not a worker cooperative yet, though we would like to become one. And I just think that this is such a more interesting slide than the one before in introducing our company. You can see here a lot of what we're doing. So the company started with me and a couple of guys and a used moving truck. We were picking up tires and taking them to the recycling center. We learned pretty quickly that it was going to be very hard for us to make a living like that, so we've diversified now into also manufacturing products out of those tires. When I started the company, I was really just interested in creating a green business. I mean, that's exactly what a 25-year-old fresh out of business school would say. I want to build a green business. I was reading Van Jones, and I was reading Deep Green Resistance and other mind-altering literature that will make you think that you should go out and save the world. It is not my first nor last delusion of grandeur. So I looked at plastics recycling, oil recycling, battery recycling, textile recycling. We finally ended up with tire recycling because Southern California is the largest waste tire market in the world. As you know, Los Angelinos, we are obsessed with our cars. Tires are also a very excellent example of that take-make-waste economy that we have because they are completely indestructible. They are designed to be that way. So recycling them and getting rid of them and getting them out of our ecosystem is quite a task. These are some of the products that we make at RCO Tires. The first one is a silage weight for anybody from a farm. You know what that looks like. They are the side rings of the tires used to hold down silage tarps. We also have on there those same rings used for the traffic industry. Some of our tires are manufactured into loading dock bumpers, and those will be attached to the backs of buildings. And then the supersized version of that down here, which would go on the large cargo ships, steamships, and tugboats. And then in the top corner is sort of our R&D process looking at what other products can be made out of tires. Because the honest truth is, I think when it comes to all of our waste streams, we just make more trash than anybody knows what to do with. So if you're interested in starting a business in the waste industry, I would say that there's plenty of room for growth and development and innovation. We definitely need it. A little bit more about RCO. I don't know if you've seen this documentary called 13th. I honestly haven't watched it because it's probably traumatizing. But it talks about the criminal justice system in the United States, and I include it here because I think everybody should watch it to sort of understand the racial dynamics in the United States. I can't speak to them here, but in the US, criminalization is more highly correlated with race than it is with criminality, right? So if you are a criminal but not black or brown, you are less likely to be arrested, less likely to be charged, much more likely to have a lighter sentence. So that means we have a huge population of black and brown people, predominantly black people, who are incarcerated not because of their criminality, but incarcerated because of their race. And what that means is we now have a huge population of people who are coming home from prison, and sort of city, state, and local governments have tried to put a lot of money and effort towards finding ways for those people to find work again. Now, I always hired formerly incarcerated people from when I opened my business, because I grew up in South Central, and I understand these dynamics perfectly. I didn't need a documentary to tell me about American apartheid. Like, it's a very lived and tangible experience. But when I started doing it, when I started hiring the formerly incarcerated at RCO, I started getting sort of a lot of accommodations, and a lot of people, there's a very sort of patronizing and charity-driven idea about this, that somehow we're gonna help these guys have a second chance at life, and isn't that a great deed that we're doing? And I find that very frustrating and disingenuous. I think that we are all here to create a new economy that works better for all of us, and that will include, to a certain extent, a reparations type system that allows people that have been previously excluded or damaged by our previous economic system to gain access again. And without getting too much into American politics, I know all of you are probably so tired of hearing about Trump, or he who shall not be named, Voldemort. His policies, his recent policies against immigration as well, and targeting Mexican American and Central American immigrants into the United States. I mean, there's a few of us out there who continue to fight back by employing people whose paperwork is not, exactly what it should be. But We have to understand his policy as also a racial policy because it is a continuation of sort of a pro-white colonial state against indigenous people, right? These are the indigenous populations of the Americas moving in places that they have for hundreds of thousands of years. And so his policy of creating a false border and keeping them out of one space is accomplishing exactly what it's intended to do. So when I talk about sort of RCO and all of the good things that we do, in the years that we've been open, we've recycled over 300 million pounds of rubber diverted from landfills. We've recycled 70 million gallons of petroleum made into new rubber products through our processes. We currently employ between 13 and 15 people, many of whom are formerly incarcerated or have immigration status issues. And many more have sort of passed through our doors, gained job experience, good references, and moved on to better jobs in other places. These are all great sort of social and environmental impacts that I'm very proud of. But at the same time, we operate at a sort of break-even level, which means that investors in general are just not that interested in us. Like venture capitalists, private equity funds, they're looking for businesses that have that hockey stick growth and revenue model, right? They want to blow it out of the water and get the best returns on their investment, whereas that's not what RCO does, but RCO serves another function. And I think that a lot of us here are asking these questions: how do we build the businesses that we really want to exist in the world, that really do make an impact and the right type of impact, if it's hard to get the funds to them? So in that effort, we've created the Los Angeles Union Cooperative Initiative, and our shop has unionized. We are proud members of the United Steelworkers, which Matthew mentioned is the sister of a union here, who is also having conversations with Mondragon. So the United Steelworkers a couple years ago signed a memorandum of understanding with Mondragon, because Mondragon is interested in it. Does everybody here know what Mondragon is? Yes, no, yes, no, okay. It's a large group of worker-owned businesses in the Basque region of Spain. They have sort of more than 100 different businesses, 80 million euro in revenue, making everything: bicycles, transformers, washing machines, dishwashers. I mean, it's an amazing industrial group, and it was built out of the Spanish Civil War, so their economy was in rubble, highly underinvested, and they were operating under fascism, interestingly. So we are trying to figure out how we can sort of join forces with them through our brotherhood with the steelworkers and create a trade union Mondragon network across the seas and continents to help build more worker-owned businesses in Los Angeles. There aren't that many in Los Angeles, I have to tell you that. And that is the story of where we are. We're in the early stages. I am definitely excited to learn more from Guy about how the process went over, because I think it's going to take us about a year or two to get to that space where we feel that the business can become entirely owned by its employees. And this last slide is simply inspirational art, which I cannot take credit for, but I look at it all the time when I think about what is the future that we want to vision for ourselves, the type of businesses we want to build for ourselves, the type of workplaces that we want to have for ourselves that are decent and dignified and democratic. And that concludes what I have to say about RCO. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Niki, and thanks to Guy as well. Really, the reason that I wanted to get both Niki and Guy on the stage here is to try and round off the conference, really. We started by hearing about a range of platform co-ops who are actually practical examples of the thing that we're talking about here, and we have been for 2 days. They're actually putting their money where their mouth is, and they're practical examples that exist right now. They're functioning businesses, apart from maybe Co-op Cycle, where you can spend your money and it works in a different way. They're owned and governed as different institutions. But these two businesses we're hearing about here have come from a different place, but are in the process of transforming to something which matches the values that we're talking about at the Open Co-op, about putting people and profit, a planet before profit. So to me, yeah, they represent a kind of new wave, really, and point to a kind of different future, which we've heard a lot of theoretical discussion over the last 2 days about all sorts of different things, and some of it maybe is being a bit fanciful, some of it's ambitious, but I wanted them to come and talk to us, genuinely to emphasize the reality that not all businesses are working according to the kind of venture capitalist dream. You know, Both of these are examples of practical businesses which are now in the process of being moved over into worker ownership, and that then will not be able to be sold to venture capitalists. As far as I understand, that is not the objective of either of you. And I'd like to try and just start by understanding a little bit more about why you think that is a good thing to be doing. What's given you the motivation to do that? Guy.
I want the business and its future to be controlled by those who are within it, those who hold it most dear, those who have a long-term view, and that could mean its suppliers, its customers, and I did the original model that I dreamt of whilst hoeing my artichokes did involve all those stakeholders. But it was just too complicated, and it wasn't a path that had been trodden by anyone else, so we settled on the employee ownership, but written into the various pages of unintelligible legal documents are things say that it can never be sold. If it is sold, all the proceeds go to the Soil Association or a charity called Send a Cow, who we support. So there is trying to remove that motivation, because, weedly little merchant, bankers and lawyers will find their way around just about anything, given them half a chance. I mean, the John Lewis, partnership, it is virtually illegal to set up an institution which doesn't conform to the normal, capitalist model. And the John Lewis partnership actually is going to be in trouble in about the next 20 years, because it could only be set up for 100 years, I think. And so anyway. So we have tried to protect it. Does that answer the question? Why? It was why, really, wasn't it?
Why, yeah.
Why? I want to use the business to shape the world, in a very small part of the world, to be more like the world that I want to live in, which is where we share more, that it's more egalitarian, that it respects human beings more, and I do spend a lot of time particularly after the crash, being absolutely furious with banking behaviour, and that was actually when Abel and Cole, our competitor, was sold to venture capitalists, and I would have two of them ringing up a day, wanting, with their slimy tones, wanting to lubricate my exit, and that made me very conscious that I wanted nothing of it, really. Yeah.
Excellent. Niki?
Well, when I started the business, I was really interested in all of the environmental metrics. I would measure how many tires we'd recycled and how much oil we'd diverted and all of these things. And I sort of had a grand idea that I was going to build like Mondragon South Central. Again, these are all things that 26-year-olds can dream of doing. But now, 6 years later, having actually gone through the process of starting the business and running the business and owning the business, I mean, really the only reason is the guys, my coworkers, right? I've got these 12 guys, I know them, I know their wives, I know their kids, right? I'm like a godmother to two of them. I couldn't stomach the idea of, I could sell my company to one of the larger tire recycling companies probably, and it would fit into their model easily, but what they would do is they would just gut it, right? They would gut the guys and probably all of my old equipment that I've amassed over the years and put in their shiny new equipment and fly out one of their managers, and that would be the end of RCO as we know it. And I can't live with that. It's, as you mentioned in your video, it's like your firstborn. It's my firstborn. My secondborn's back there, but my firstborn is RCO.
It would. I do feel very serious. It's, you worked on it like that. It becomes very, very personal, and the people within it personal, and the customers personal. And it would, just as I say, to sell it to a venture capitalist would feel like selling, one of my children into prostitution, is what I say, yeah.
I wanted to see if we could get two of your great stories. I listened to you on Desert Island Discs, and you mentioned something about reasons for putting workers in charge, and gave a story about people picking potatoes and...
Right. Yeah, carrots. Well, I used to employ a lot of, can I say grungy, traveller types who used to come. I'd go and pick them up in my pickup, and they'd come and work for the day, and I did pay them piecework. And, as most work in horticulture, that's how it's paid. and it was so much per sack or something, 50p or something. And I remember that day, they were all going off down to Cornwall to pick daffodils the next day. And they lined up the carrot sacks in the rows. We counted them, I paid them, took them back to their vendors and so on. And I came back, spent the evening sewing up the carrots, stacking them on pallets, sending them off on a lorry. A couple of days later, I started getting phone calls, and there was a few carrots on top, but mostly they were just full of earth and stones. And the point is, if you pay people purely on money, don't be surprised if that's how they behave. So, if you incentivize bankers, with their bonuses and what they've earned, don't be surprised if they take ridiculous risks and, manipulate their... I was yesterday actually planting cabbages with two people who, haven't enjoyed the greatest privileges in life, and rarely, we don't really do piecework anymore, but I knew that there was no other way to employ these people. And sure enough, I came back in the evening and they'd started off planting them perfectly, and all the bloody cabbages were just lying in rows up, half the peat out of the ground and whatever. Anyway, I just think, money is such a poor motivator of people. There is no end of research to suggest that, and it's totally proven. And why we continue with this model, which assumes that money is the only way to incentivize, organize people, is just extraordinary. I mean, clearly it does matter. You have to pay fairly, but beyond that, it's a very poor way of organizing ourselves, and I think demeaning to us all as human beings, actually.
Niki, do you have a story about a worker or some benefit of putting a worker in charge rather than paying them directly as piecework?
I think because our company is so small and we've all sort of come on this journey together, that sense of sort of pride and teamwork has definitely developed over time. We, as I said, started with a lot of used equipment, which is very easy to sort of break if you don't remember to grease it and sort of care for it. And occasionally, you get a new guy on the floor and he's there just to clock the hours and get the check. And I'm so lucky because some of the other team will sort of step in and say, hey, don't be so rough on the equipment. We've got to take care of it because if it breaks, then we don't have any work for the rest of the week, and that's going to be reflected on our check later. But it's, as you mentioned, though, I don't think just money is the motivation, right? There's a certain pride and caretaking of the things that they work with on a daily basis. And when I see that, I'm like, you guys can totally run this business without me. You don't need me. Just fire the boss. We're done. I'm done. Because they know exactly what they're doing. They can do their job just as well if I just get out of the way.
I mean, we are on a journey, which is, started with my father, who was incredibly idealistic about human nature, I think, but a very poor manager in many ways. And I suppose I inherited his values, but actually turning those into a business model where it really works, where people can deliver on their potential, is a painstaking, patient process that requires, a phenomenal amount of, introspection personally and of our board members, which is what we're kind of going through, what are the barriers to trusting people? But as we go through this process and we do trust more and consult more and enable people to make more decisions and have more autonomy at work, I have to say, we're only 6 weeks into since the change, but with the build up to it, it's just been extraordinary, actually. I think we're very unusual that we spent so long planning it, and a lot of companies that we went and visited went into employee ownership because the owner had died or something, it had been very quick. We went through we did a lot of research. I think we had a couple of board members who were fantastic in this, and is it the cultural change and trusting people, and that it's more about than just the money, is it's really paying dividends now, and I'm really glad that we took what seemed like a painstaking 13 years, I think, to do it. I would urge anyone to be patient.
Yeah, I mean, that was very much the question I was going to ask as well, because it seems to me that what Brexit did was confirm your idea that people's emotional lives counted more than the economic argument, because after all, let's face it, the economic argument was there from all 5 parties, and yet the emotional call to take back control overrode everything. So I'm curious whether or not you're consciously thinking, I mean, both of you came to this conclusion to have employee-owned companies as the thing that helps you to keep control of your situation and as the way that you want to proceed. What kind of a character do you think is required to be able to maintain that? I mean, and how you came to it in very different ways. You seemed to me that you, as you just described, your family always had these values. But you started, didn't you, with the idea that you just wanted to run a really successful business. And I also noticed your earrings, Black Lives Matter. Yes. Is this a moment, where there's a sort of waking up, wokeness, if you like, about what really matters and what's needed?
I think so, and I think that I do a series of workshops in the community on small business ownership. Anybody can come in if they want to talk to me about starting their business plan and things like that. And occasionally, sort of, the city or maybe funders or founders will say, oh, well, I know that you're working with these poor people, these impoverished people, these disadvantaged people, and, the things that they must want, they just want really practical things, right? Like they want to make sure that they have a regular paycheck and, stable housing. I'm like, yeah, okay, everybody wants regular paychecks and stable housing. But the assumption that because we are impoverished monetarily, that we are also somehow impoverished in spirit is definitely wrong. Like every single one of these courses that I've taught, the people that are sitting in that room, they may have the smallest idea to open some like boutique shop that sells hip-hop wear, but then they tag onto it that they also want it to be a community meeting place, and they also want it to be a safe center for teens, and I'm starting to cry right now, it's like makes me so emotional, but they all have these incredible ideas, and I think that what that says to me is that all of us in our communities want to build better things. The main thing that's holding us back is access to capital all the time. We just need more money to do more of it. And that's why I've been going to all of your great sessions on how to access capital for small businesses. I think you're right, though. I think that a lot of people are coming around to the idea, and I'm glad to see events like this and more discussions on how to finance this work. But within our own communities, I think the spirit has always been there.
Yeah, so is this a community endeavor? I mean, both of you have mentioned the word relationship, and the importance of believing in each other or seeing each other, right? So, our political culture is very much homo economicus, manage the people or even save the people, but not really about seeing the people, which has got to be a bottom-up thing. I mean, do you feel that we have, whether in the States or here in the UK, do you think you have the political support or the political culture to be able to continue with what you're doing?
The employee ownership has had, there are some pretty good tax breaks, both for the now co-owners and for myself. So I suppose that's, that's political support. It's the sort of belief, I would say, in particular, of managers, in particular of directors, that, all the knowledge is held in the boardroom and, no one else is qualified to make a decision. Everything has to be fed up and then fed back down again. And, my directors, they just, we have started consulting on them. We consulted recently on whether we should give the lowest paid people in the company a pay rise, because we couldn't afford to give it to everyone. And of the 20 people we consulted, 19 of them earned less than the cut-off point. And they almost unanimously advised us not to do that because they felt it would be divisive. And, that is just extraordinary. I mean, my director, I couldn't believe it, actually. I was really in favour of doing it. So we just didn't have the information in the boardroom to make the right decision. And they saved us from making a bad decision. And based on that, the directors are much more willing to go out and consult with. Another thing on shift working recently, that we're moving to a shift pattern. And instead of them trying to impose it, as they would have done 2 years ago, they went and consulted, and the staff came up with that's how they wanted to organise themselves. But that is not how most conventional Homo economic. How do you describe it?
Homo economicus.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
it is. We
Yeah.
have had quite a blokey culture
Yeah.
at a senior level in the business, and it is a problem actually. And but now increasingly, those blokes are actually recognising that it's a problem, and it's something that they are addressing. So,
Yeah. I mean, certainly in this space, I can feel a very important shift. But do you then operate yourself below the radar of politics? Is that how you feel about it, or do you feel that you're trying to seize it as well?
So I've been very fortunate, I think, because within the Los Angeles community, my local state assembly person and my city council person and my county representatives, they come out to RCO and they sort of pay us these visits, and they bring these lovely plaques with gold leaf on them. And I think that it is nice, and it is positive, and it is important, especially I think for the guys, to know that recognition is out there and that they're appreciated. But at the end of the day, I think when I get those plaques, I'm always like, can I shave this gold leaf off? Or like, is there a deposit here, slip on the back that I can put this in the bank? How can I actually make those those commendations work for us? And people always ask, what can you do to sort of help poor people, or what can you do to help build businesses? And the answer is always money. We need capital, and I feel like that is very slow coming, and it's not going to be coming from the government, at least anytime soon. But I'm happy to have my mind changed. I loved the Preston presentation earlier, so I have to go and meet Matthew.
Great. I wanted to try and link this session back to the previous one that we had, where we talked about mutual credit for co-ops and the idea of cooperative organizations, or even just social enterprises, joining together to access mutual credit between each other in order to facilitate better access to finance, access to capital. So I wanted to ask, how would you feel about accepting new forms of value exchange in return for your goods and services? Is that something that you might consider at RCO and Riverford? Guy?
No, in a word. I mean, I did try and operate a program where people could come and kind of work in exchange and whatever, and it was just a nightmare. I found it utterly exhausting emotionally. It may be now with more engaged staff, I could delegate that to someone else, but getting, urbanites who had no idea what a day's work was. I mean, they didn't, one of my staff could do what they did in 10 minutes, a day's work in 10 minutes. They were just, no, that's unfair. About a third of them were quite good, actually. 2/3 of them were. Yeah, so that's my only experience with trying to do it, and it did drive me out the wall, actually.
Fair.
Sorry?
I don't think that's what I was asking.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I think what Guy was referring to was the exchanging labor for vegetables directly. Was that how you tried to employ those people? Or?
Kind of. It was.
Okay, so the question, though.
Yeah.
So the question, and you probably weren't here in the previous session, but we were talking about a mutual credit exchange. So the idea that, say you need to buy some new tires for your tractor, for example, at the moment you need to go to a tire supplier and just buy them with cash up front.
Yeah.
But if there was a cooperative selling tires, and you didn't have any cash, then you could go into debt with them, accept their tires, and then equally you can accept some other form of payment, something else that you need, say somebody to fix your tractor would come and work for you, and you operate in this way, in like a cashless way, almost.
I'm sorry, I just think that, more fish to fry, really. I just think, you're up against the banking industry. It is dreadful. Let's have some better banks. The guy, Tony, someone or other down in Plymouth is setting one up, and I wholeheartedly support that. But to try and sort of set up, we've had the Totnes Pound just down the road from us. It's a tourist thing. It's not serious. Can we just sort of, I would say, focus on the main issues? And the main issue is is the way we use money.
The Totnes Pound has got nothing to do with mutual exchange.
Okay, sorry, I'm being gratuitously offensive, I can tell, which I'm trying not to, but...
They promoted those
Yeah.
things in order
Okay, well, Okay,
Thanks, Mary. I think we'll let the speakers carry on.
Okay, thanks for that. Trade is good, and money has enabled trade, and there are bad things about it, no doubt about it. I'm not in favour of unregulated capitalism, but it is. I just don't think money's the problem. I think we're the problem, and what we do with it, and how we regulate banks, and we got in this bloody mess because they weren't regulated, and we had a culture of greed, and and I think that's about us, not about money, really.
I think it's a fair answer, and it's good to hear you pushing back on that. I'm intrigued by your stance, Niki.
Cooperation amongst cooperatives is, sort of a dream for us, but in Los Angeles, we simply don't have enough. There's, my company, there's a small electrical company with about 5 employee owners and a small coffee shop. So the cooperative sort of ecosystem in Los Angeles is very nascent, and we're trying to encourage it and to build it, but it's very difficult to cooperate amongst cooperators there. Now, there's quite a bit more going on in like San Francisco with the Arizmendi bakeries, and the Arizmendi bakeries amongst themselves cooperate amongst each other. Each bakery has worker owners, they contribute to a shared council, they lend money to each other, and they've added on now sort of a construction cooperative. And I would love for RCO to grow into something like that. If RCO, we deal a lot with the trucking industry, so if RCO was in tires and then also later in trucking and then maybe had a machine shop since we repair most of our own equipment, things like that, if those broke out into other smaller worker cooperatives and then we cooperated amongst each other. Right now, when we have to look for cooperation, we look to the Bay Area or back east in New York. There's been a great movement towards worker ownership and worker-owned businesses in New York. Several of the largest ones are happening there. And then Mondragon in Spain, of course, is always sort of like the Emerald City. I've never been, I really want to go, but the idea is to model after theirs, where they do have financial institutions and an education center and a healthcare system that is all run cooperatively and jointly owned by the owners and the community members there.
So when you can imagine, as you just have, and that kind of a civilization is kind of modeled for us all, what's the obstacle, do you think, for us? You've described how it's not yet really begun, but from a point of view of having a successful business, Guy, what could extend what you're doing into that sort of scenario in which more and more people are included in this experience that you're having? Because it seems to me as if you've got everything like a microcosm in your business, and it's beautiful there. There's relationship and and quality produce, but you're a bit worried about the future. What is your vision of the future that could move in this direction? What is it that how can we develop our own projects from wherever we start? And you two are both starting from quite different places, it seems to me. But if that's the dream, that we can have societies that, because they have relationship with each other, are now making better decisions. How can we, from where you are, but also Guy, from where you are, how can you extend that qualities that you have now in your companies to move into that direction?
I was so impressed by the Preston model, right? This idea that the local city council people jumped on board in ways to keep the money in the community so that the people that are living there and working there also own the business, and now they're fostering more worker cooperatives. I would love to find those two and talk to them, because we'd like to build something like that in Los Angeles. The scale is very different, though. Greater Los Angeles has the population of Australia. It's 20 million people or so down there. It's hard to move the needle. Maybe in a smaller space like the city of Compton that we're in, which is about 100,000 people, we could start talking to city council members and local banks. The financial regulation in the States makes it really difficult to use credit unions for business banking, and the big banks spend a lot of money to make that happen, to make it more difficult for us to have cooperatively owned financial institutions in the States. So we're pushing back on all of those fronts. But a lot of it is just education too. And Guy can hopefully tell us more about what the education process was with his employees, but so few of us interact with democracy in any real way in our normal daily lives that when presented with the option of having a democratic workplace, it's terrifying and unknown and difficult to understand, and it can feel like your boss is just lying to you.
Yeah.
So, we've had to start with like very basic trainings. What is a cooperative? How does it work? How would you want to structure it? How is that going to change management flow? Because most people, they may have been to a cooperative grocery store once in their life, but they don't even really know how it operates on the back end. So the education part is really important, which is why what you're doing here is so important.
I'll just carry on from Niki rather than, I will answer the question if you want me to afterwards, but, you can't just suddenly, to people who have been told what to do, who have had no agency, you can't just suddenly expect them to be, making their own decisions and behaving, it's just not going to happen. I very naively in my early days, got up in bed one day and decided, we're going to be all democratic in how we, and of course it's, it was a disaster, and it takes a lot of time, and actually it turned out for us that the main obstacle was actually a lot of it was me. I mean, I had these ideas about how I wanted everyone to behave, but I wasn't even doing it myself, and certainly my board members weren't doing it. They were probably taking the lead from them and their supports for, and we had, fostered something that I think I have to take responsibility for, this very, domineering, sometimes even bullying, blokey sort of culture. Certainly having more women on the board would help. We find, we are finding it hard to recruit, the kind of production industries. I imagine Niki find this, they're not, anyway, so many women candidates. But, I think that would help. How do we progress from here? I think, by being successful, actually, by showing that you can run a respectful human business, that is commercially and socially and environmentally, successful, doing the right things. We have to show that, and then people will, people will start listening.
So is your model more, it sounds to me as if your model is more developmental. So in other words, somebody joins your business, they may not have a lot of responsibility to start with, and then through being in the business, working together, being part of that team, they develop that capacity that you're talking about. So I think if you say just switch it on, I agree with you. Just switching on democracy is not very successful. People have to develop those capabilities. Is that what you're describing?
Well, yes. I mean, we do, a policy is to try and to promote from within. Actually, where we have brought in, as some of the cufflinks brigade, it's always been disastrous, actually, at a senior level, the pointy shoes and the cufflinks. And you pay them a lot of money and they seem terribly clever and they're completely bloody useless, usually, and they haven't lasted very long. So, yes, promoting from within seems to have been mostly, and taking a risk with people, younger people, who, particularly in the area of sort of marketing, I think we should be prepared to take those risks. I'm drifting, I can't remember what the question was.
No, I just asked you whether or not, rather than switching from, non-agency to agency overnight, to be in a situation where you can develop agency. And that should be so with democracy too, I guess. Yeah.
We've been working with we've employed a learning development manager, and we have a coach who's worked with the board for almost a year now, and is now working with a broader, about 40 other managers, and she has been really extraordinary. I mean, she did encourage us to be patient. I'm an impetuous person, I want it to all happen tomorrow. But, over time, it is, sometimes that sort of rehearsing the behaviours which don't come naturally to you, that's the only way to do it, just repetitive and keeping an eye on yourself and getting other people to sort of monitor you and feedback and so on. You can, some of the most, one person in particular, who was in many ways brilliant but was an absolute bully, has really, over a period of 2 years, has really turned around. We probably, if we were doing the politically correct thing, should have sacked him, but he would have just gone on and been a bully somewhere else. And instead we invested in coaching, and it's just extraordinary, the transformation. I think the normalization of behavior dictated by what's around you, what you see around you, is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And the ability of people to change, I just don't think should be underestimated. Even the most hopeless cases sometimes. It is extraordinary. Actually, I can think of many examples of some really extraordinary changes over the last couple of years that, through this process. Yeah.
Great.
That's awesome. Nick, do you want to?
No, I can second that experience when you mentioned that, guys come to work at RCO and they've worked at, just like any other place, right? One guy worked for an armored truck delivery service, another one worked for a different tire company, but those companies had cultures of competition, infighting, backstabbing, undermining each other, right? If something's broken, oh, blame that guy. And so I think watching that change happen as they realized that, blame wasn't going to be assigned in a way that was punitive, that, everybody can now their behavior is so much different. And it is because of what you mentioned, offering dignity and decency and democracy in a way that is actually accessible.
And getting people's emotional needs met the way that you described.
Yeah. Actually, this journey really started about 8 years ago when, on part of our quarterly roundups, we had these discussion groups with the staff, and it was that we asked all the managers, we asked them what is management, or perhaps it was what is good management, and all the people on the shop floor said it, spoke about respect and having their human needs met, and all the managers talked about KPIs and numbers and whatever, and it was throughout the organisation. Every table I went and listened at got the same thing, and it was, oh my God, we've really got a problem here. And it's taken us 10 years, I suppose, to turn that round, and several attempts failed, actually. It was really, instead of paying a firm of trainers to do it, actually deciding we were going to do it ourselves was when we really started seeing a change.
I think we should take some questions from the floor now. We've got a few things that have been queuing up there. The first one is for Niki, which says, do you think that others will continue to gain the insight of the implied complicity of business in the oppressive system you've identified? And what's the tipping point for other entrepreneurs to follow your lead? The second part of that is something I'm especially interested in.
What is the tipping point for other entrepreneurs to follow your lead? I think we should acknowledge the incredible positive energy of Oliver hosting the conference marathon like a boss.
Thank you, whoever wrote that. Cheers, guys. I can delete that one.
I've wondered a lot about this, and I can only speak from my own experience. It's really difficult for me to speculate on what on earth would make anyone else want to become an entrepreneur. For me, it was something that I wanted to do, and I was able to do it because I was, living at home with my parents, and I didn't have a lot of bills, and I didn't pay myself for the first 3 or 4 years that we're in business. My paychecks are still sketchy. So typically, what encourages people to start small businesses is if they can get access to the venture capital that they need to pay themselves and their team in the startup money-losing segment. I really appreciated Lucy. I don't know if she's still here, but she was in the other room talking about her fundraising to start the electric car sharing business. And one of the I love listening to seasoned executives, CEOs, and business owners because they always say something that blows me away. And she said, don't be scared of the burn, which is that there is a period when you start a business that you're not going to be making money. And so you're going to be burning up those cash reserves that you started off with, that original money that you got from your investors. And I didn't, stupidly, I didn't do that. I didn't think anybody would give me money. I doubt anybody would have anyways. So I started the business on, maxed out my credit cards, which is terrible cash flow planning because 6 months later, I was then asking my mom if I could max out her credit cards. And that's not a good way to do this. It's the quote-unquote bootstrap model, which the bootstrap fiction about starting businesses and somehow pulling yourself up out of poverty is prolific but not true. It's just not. So I think that the tipping point would be when there's more funds out there and more platforms and opportunities for us to raise the capital that we need to start the businesses and pay ourselves living wages while we get those off the floor. I think that's really going to be what would allow many, many people that have entrepreneurial aspirations to take the leap.
When you say us, do you mean folks that are woke, people of color, women?
Yeah, it's especially, I would say that it becomes especially difficult for women and people of color to access capital just because we have generations of historic disenfranchisement, which means that we don't necessarily have like a parent who has a friend at work who has another friend that can put you in touch with that social network that leads to resources. I mean, if you're broke, like everybody you know is also broke. And so it's really hard for us to get the money. And I've been to a lot of these conferences that I think are supposed to connect like women of color and like local veteran-owned businesses and things with the access to capital. And I found that the investors that were there, like they were just killing time. Like they weren't serious. They weren't there to bring the money and write the checks and make the investments, right? They were there to sort of like have their company logo on the banner to show that they supported quote unquote businesses like mine. And that's an ongoing theme, that people support my business, but they don't support my business. And the money is the tipping point. I keep going back to the money. I know money is a terrible motivator. It's not intended to motivate people. It's intended to be a tool. It's what creates our ability to create the things that we want.
It does seem extraordinary, that sort of patient capital, which I would say, we were mostly after, as opposed to the venture capitalist model of, multiply it, whatever, 5, 10 times in 3 years. The patient money that's prepared to accept a degree of risk for a 3% return or something, it's quite difficult to earn 3% now, I mean, you feel it should be there. I mean, and why is it, I don't know why it is such a problem, well, the Preston model is, all that pension fund money that's just sloshing around the city, taking commissions for every time it's moved from one place to another. I'm sure it could earn better returns and, and achieve much more socially, environmentally. And I guess that's where we would like some help from government, because so much of it, the move to, pension schemes and self-administered pension just seemed, it was just like the Exchequer had sat down with a bunch of bankers and thought, how much can we rip people off? I mean, it's just outrageous, the commissions, whereas, the Dutch who manage their own pensions, for the same amount of money invested, they get a third more in pensions at the end. It's just, it's outrageous. But anyway, sorry, anyway, the inpatient capital, actually, of the venture capitalist model, which is supporting a lot of kind of techie startups, I don't entirely welcome. I mean, I think it makes life, this is sour grapes, I have to admit, but I mean, it makes life for people who have a more patient, approach. I'd be very happy to get 3%, and it makes our life very difficult. We're surrounded by people who are obsessed by growth and the quick multiplier, and it does make our life very difficult. I could name a couple of companies, according to our brand research, who have been going longer than us, are more farming than us, and sell more organic food and more organic than us, even though they do none of those things, because they spent the money on growth and advertising. You can probably tell it makes me a little bit, anyway, narky.
But maybe I think that's a key point there, because, the story that we're told that the venture capitalists are the successful ones in our society, and we hear, they obviously don't tell us the stories about all the failed investments. The ones that we hear are about these hockey sticks and these unicorns which delivered 10 or 17%, and isn't that amazing? But we don't hear about the other 9 that failed. And Vivian, who's running the Capital Conundrum session at the moment, right over there, where hopefully they're solving this all for us, is apt to point out that, often co-ops can deliver a 3% return steady and they fail much less and all of those things. And by, allowing the venture capitalist story to sort of hold court and have its say, it kind of undermines the opportunity for the patient capital to be deployed in the way that it perhaps should. And there's a question there which sort of relates to that for Guy, which says, how can we use narratives to persuade others with the privilege of inheriting wealth to consider transitioning to worker ownership? And how can we use business values and language to encourage these individuals? Plus, was the shift complicated? I think that's 3 questions, really. But if we focus in on the one about using narrative, I mean, that's what I was getting at. So there's this narrative that the venture capitalists are the successful ones. Can you think of some other stories which highlight that why people with wealth should consider investing in businesses like yours and or transitioning their businesses to
I
worker
suppose
ownership?
I'd slightly turn it on its head and say, why not, in a way? I mean, that there is, we're predicated on this sort of belief that, that success, significance in this world, is based on, money, what the things that money buys and so on. I mean, again, there's no end of research to say, that is just rubbish, So it's a question of, I think, giving people the sort of confidence to, or somehow helping them to grow that confidence to be able to make their own judgments about what is valuable to them. And actually, when I arrived this morning, the gentleman, Chris, someone was sitting next to me, actually, when we were having a little discussion, pointed this is. It's about really the understanding what is important to you. And that takes quite a lot of confidence when the whole narrative around you is about money and more of it. And I went surfing a couple of years ago with actually one of my guys who was helping me on some brand work. And he says, yeah, I've met quite a few people like you guys, people who have, actually sold their businesses. And I call them the 3 Ds. They're all divorced, dyslexic, and depressed. I was in the process of getting divorced. I am dyslexic. But I am not depressed.
You don't seem it.
But I think I would have been had I sold the business, and it would have been so easy to, listen to those snake oil salesmen, and go off and do what Keith Abel had done and bought a big mansion in Hampshire and play a lot of tennis and drink champagne. But I'm damn sure it wouldn't have made me any happier. So my point is, it's about sort of confidence, really. And there being alternative examples around, I think, and every TV program about entrepreneurship and all about making deals and so on, it drives me up the wall. It's about most business is about relationships, but you never see that on one of those telly programs. It's all about making a deal, which is if you're a second-hand car salesman, that might be true, but actually I don't even think it is there. I'm sure you'd get a reputation for selling. Anyway, did I answer the question? I can't remember one bit of it.
I think in terms of the changing narrative, everything you're saying, I'm very familiar with that. I'm hearing it more and more, and I think that post-Brexit, there's a lot of that. People wanting to have belonging, meaning and purpose in their lives. This is something you're hearing a lot about. Not just here, but all over the world, in pockets all over the world, which is why it's giving rise to a new kind of politics now. But the conversation between the two of you I'm interested in, because does it work for you, Niki, the idea that it's the, emotional needs that get met, that they could be the goal, not simply the money, which you need, absolutely, to even get started, but always to have it in mind, what Guy's talking about is that in the end, the money isn't the thing. It's the fact that you can be together, work together, have relationship, make your life worth living, all of those things, because somehow that's solid, and you can do for yourself. Does that work in your business, do you think? Does that work for you?
I'm not sure if you meant the employees or the investors, because we were just talking about investors. And there, as you mentioned, there is sort of a movement out there for slow capital, right? There are wealthy individuals who've pooled their funds into funds and are investing in things that they believe in because of their emotional connection to it. They're wanting to get their money out of the big banks and get their money out of the funds that invest in things they don't believe in, especially like divesting from fossil fuels and things like that. I think that those funds are amazing and excellent as a first step. I will admit to being somewhat financially naive about what they're allowed to do, but what I have learned is that there's quite a few limitations, like regulatory limitations on what these funds are allowed to invest in and the ways that the businesses have to be structured in order to receive those funds. So, the Security Exchange Commission in the United States regulates all of our sales of shares and equities and things like that. And so there's a sort of like $100,000 benchmark at which I would then have to go ahead and get like publicly certified books, and I would be in a whole different segment of fundraising at that point, which we're probably about ready for. I mean, we do $1 million in revenue every year, so it's about $100,000 a month. So if my ability to get access to money is $100,000, it's like a sneeze in the bucket. It's just not enough to move the needle for RCO. So the places where the conscientious investors are, who are investing in a way to follow their heart, are very small and very regulated and very marginalized. And the big boys, the big banks, the VCs, the guys that control all the money in the world is still where the larger transactions happen. And I have not quite figured out how to get over into those rooms and get on those stages. Not that I would even want to, because I don't want to be motivated by what motivates them.
Yeah. No, but also all of that, yes, but also for your employees. You know, because you're struggling, you know, obviously you will struggle to get money, be able to raise their wages. But, you know, if you're militant about the culture within your company and the relationships that are built, and that is the thing you talk about, and that actually becomes an attractor as well for the growth of your company. Does that work for you?
Yeah, we had a similar experience to yours, which is that when we unionized, our wages became very transparent. There's a wage chart. Everybody knows where they fit in on it based on your seniority and your position in the company. And so, of course, the very first thing the union wants to negotiate for is better wages. And I said, I'm happy to talk about better wages. I want everybody to have better wages, but here's RCO's books. And I just handed them the financials. And I said, as you can see, there's just not enough money in there for better wages right now. And all of the employees sort of looked at it and thought about it and said, okay, well then this is what it is. We'll just agree to this chart. We'll get incremental increases based on seniority as time goes on, but we're not going to make any like huge demands to raise our hourly wages now, because we believe in the mission of the company and we want the company to continue. We don't want to put it out of business. We want to keep our jobs. So, you know, they arrived at that decision sort of on their own, and I think it did have a lot to do with culture and belief in what we're building, and that they want the company to succeed, even if that means that they're not going to get the, you know, $4 or $5 raise that they really were hoping for.
I think that's a key point there. You talked about transparency, and at the Open Co-op, we love the concept of being open. Like, we kind of believe that if you were to share everything, if you keep no secrets, you don't really need to remember anything. You don't need to remember what you lied about.
It's one of my
all
favorite
that
quotes,
stuff.
Mark Twain.
Right. So how significant do you think that openness and transparency is to this kind of change? Like, is that a sort of a strategy within your businesses that you try and increase your transparency? I mean, you talk, Guy, about when you consulted with the 40 people, suddenly you learned something new, and it was like, oh, well, that was useful, which was a part of opening up your process, right?
Yeah, no, we are actually consulting with the staff at the moment. We have a kind of interim committee because we haven't actually elected the staff council yet, so I think we call it the working group, but it's fairly representative of staff. And one of the things that they're working on is the most appropriate, useful, meaningful way of presenting financial information. And, you know, it's very easy if you're used to looking at, you know, tables of figures to be able to interpret them and so on, but it's completely alien to, you know, and we did, you know, a traffic light system was too facile, but we came up with a dial, seemed to work for most people for now. Hopefully, as they become more, you know, understanding of those, you know, we might get to some more sophisticated figures as well. But so, you know, in theory, transparency, yes. You know, my managing director actually wanted to publish all the board minutes. I did. Well, we're still discussing how we're going to manage that, but I do worry that we would just spend our whole time worrying about what was going to end up on the minutes and not be able to have. You know, I know when we took on a non-executive director, the first thing that he did was, you know, to make sure that he had been minuted as being caring about health and safety, you know, and that, you know, it was just, oh my God, really, you know, if we're going to have that attitude to everything, I think it's so. In theory, yes, you know, we should be. I mean, you know, we're discussing whether we're going to be transparent about what everyone's paid, and I think within a year or two we probably will. We weren't actually, because one or two people were embarrassed by how little they were paid. At a senior level was the objection, but
It's normally the reverse, right?
it's normally the reverse, yeah. So it was. We do have a fairly flat pay structure. No one's paid more than 9 times what the person at the bottom, including all benefits and perks and everything. So which,
that's awesome.
yeah.
Niki, transparency.
When and maybe it's a millennial thing, but when I started the business, I was really into that transparency. And as I mentioned, that's one of my favorite quotes, right? If you never lie, you don't have to remember anything. And so I was fairly transparent with my customers about what, other customers' prices were sometimes, and with wages, and wasn't trying all the time to keep secrets, I think, from the employees about how we do business, sort of what our vendors are and where our margins are and things like that. Now, I started the business with a fellow who's now long gone, but he was livid. Like, it was completely against everything that he had learned and valued in his 45 years of business. And it led to these extreme sort of arguments about this. He would say, "You can't do business like that. You have to keep your trade secrets." And his idea of how to motivate employees always included like giving some information to others and more money to these, and like creating sort of an internal competition as a motivation. And it's a disaster. It's terrible because it's not even based on any sort of science or learning. It's just sort of something he had devised in his own mind out of his life experience, and believing that the whole world is sort of dog eat dog and hyper competitive and homo economico. And it was just like. So we now that he's gone, we definitely are on that mission. There have been challenges to it. I actually have had trade secret theft. And there's some things that you want to keep internally, and there's some things that you want to be very open about. But I think that the transparency with the wages, and now that we've started the meetings, we are also doing the financial education part, like putting up our profit and loss and sort of sitting through it with the guys and showing them each line item. This is how much we spend on supplies, and this is how much we make from this particular product. And so we're in the very early stages of that, and it requires a lot of education. But it has to be part of the process of having a democracy, and I can't imagine it working any other way. Because if they don't understand the money, then they don't understand their business, and you have to live and breathe your business to really run it.
One area of transparency which has really worked for us is transparency over pricing. So we about 2 or 3 years ago, it was about once every couple of years I throw my toys out of the pram. I won't be able to do it anymore, but I did storm into a board meeting saying, having just seen us wedged between discount leg waxing and a discount paintballing was discount Riverford veg boxes. And I just say, we're not doing this anymore. We are not. I'd rather go down with the violins playing, and we're not, and we just stopped discounting, which it did, in the kind of, if you're trying to get customers online, it does make life quite difficult, and our rate of acquisition halved, and we fell behind the competition, and it took us probably 2 years for the company to recover from that. But actually, our sales are stronger than ever now, and the idea, that you are. It was that whole thing when, the banking crisis, the people, you discount to your new customers, and the only way you can do that is by ripping off your existing customers. Tease and squeeze, everyone calls it. It's the standard business model for subscription businesses. And it's just, it's that thing of you assume everyone's motivated by money. Don't be surprised if they are. That's how the customers will behave. And that's how our competitors' customers behave. And when they've shopped around and got all their discounts, they normally come back to us, and it's actually working really, really well now. So as an overlying thing, being honest and transparent is, I think you just have in the back of our mind, and actually is written into our legal documents. If you are going to withhold information, you have to have a damn good reason for it and be able to justify it. The presumption has to be that you're going to share it. How can you expect people to participate in making good decisions unless you're going to give them the information?
Absolutely, yeah.
There was one excellent quote that I had heard from another worker cooperative, a landscaping company. And what they said was horizontal in the boardroom, vertical in the field. Meaning that at the decision-making level, when large decisions are being made about the company, all of the worker owners are participating. But once they get to the field and they actually have to execute in their work, there is a certain hierarchy because there are, of course, people that are more experienced and people who are novices and people everywhere in between on the spectrum. And so I really appreciated having that visual for myself as I consider RCO going forward, is that, yes, we will be horizontal at the decision-making level, but when it comes to getting out there and getting those tires processed into bumpers, we just need to get into lock and step and do our jobs in a timely manner and make the product to the specs and get it shipped.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We're kind of running out of time, so I just wanted to ask one last question. What advice would you give to other business owners who know that it's a good plan to do the kinds of things that you've done with your businesses, but basically just haven't had the balls yet to come up and step up and do this? Like, what advice would you give them?
Grow a pair? Can I say that?
You can say that.
Go on, Niki, louder.
Grow a pair. What brought you to this conclusion?
You know, I be brave and be patient, and I suppose I would. I'm going to get a bit tearful myself now. I mean, I've recounted the day that we became employee-owned, and I gave up and gave a speech about what I hoped they would do with the business, and it was priceless. You know, it was the feeling and the feedback from the staff and in subsequent weeks was utterly priceless and worth, So, yeah, do it.
Let's do it.
Any closing thoughts, Niki?
I would like to say something as profound. I guess I would say that somebody has to be the first, right? There's not a lot of examples of this out there, and so we just have to be brave enough to choose to create the world that we want to live in. I think that all businesses have an arc. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and usually the end is some sort of transition in leadership or a crisis in leadership. An owner dies or moves on and things like that. But when you think about, again, Mondragon as an example, but other cooperative businesses, they can go on to live for much longer because they don't have that single, bold leader at the front of the helm, leading the way. They're led internally and they are leaderful, and those are the businesses that can sustain us into the future that we want.
That's brilliant. Any parting thoughts, Indra?
Sorry?
Any parting thoughts?
No, I'm just very moved because it seems to me that you are describing a new culture, not just by what you're saying, but also by the way that you're being here in this space. And you're describing to us what you need to hold on to and courageously move forward with, which is very different from being in the race, winning or losing, falling or dying. It's the sovereignty, isn't it? It's like being holding on to yourself and having the courage to stay with that. And I feel very encouraged by that, and thank you very much.
I do, yeah. I think, being brave in order to create the world we want is a good place to finish there. So thanks to Indra for co-hosting.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Niki and Guy.
Thank you so much.